Welcome to the PnP Virtual Conference. In today's session, we're going to cover upgrading your SharePoint Framework projects using the Office 365 CLI. My name is David Warner. I'm a principal consultant with Catapult Systems and a Microsoft 365 Office Development MVP. A little bit about myself. I'm a big sports fan. I love hockey and football, but an even bigger fan of the community. I love collaborating with the community. I love working with the community. So if you ever have any questions or would like to collaborate together on a sample or a presentation, just feel free to reach out. I do a lot of vlogging videos on my website, warner.digital, and I'm pretty active on Twitter at DavidWarnerII. Definitely looking forward to collaborating with you. And co-presenting with me today is my good friend and fellow PnP team member, Hugo Bernier.
And my name is Hugo Bernier. I'm an enterprise architect. I'm an independent consultant from Canada, and I'm a Microsoft Office 365 development MVP and a proud PnP team member. I'm the opposite of David when it comes to hockey and football. I really don't like it, but I am passionate about cooking and food. I also call myself the world's laziest developer, but I've never really bothered to check whether it's true or not. You can reach me at my blog at tahoeninjas.blog or on Twitter at BernierH.
Before we get started today, we wanted to mention that at this time, the Office 365 CLI is currently in the process of being renamed to CLI for Microsoft 365. While this does not affect any of the functionality in this session, we wanted to make you aware of this change to avoid any confusion when you see the use of the new name inside the official documentation.
Our agenda for today is we'll talk about some common scenarios for SPFx Solution Upgrades. And then we'll show you how to find an SPFx web part sample. And we'll discuss the Office 365 CLI. So we'll do an overview. We'll show you how to install the Office 365 CLI. And then we'll show you the SPFx Doctor, as well as how to do project upgrade. Then we'll do a session review, and we'll show you some useful links. So what are some of the common scenarios for SPFx Solution Upgrades? First of all, let's point out that if you have a web part that works and you don't need to do anything to it, you don't need to fix bugs or anything like that, you really don't need to upgrade it. It'll continue working in the version of SharePoint that you have running. However, if you need to fix some bugs in a web part, or you need to add new functionality to an existing web part, or if you want to take advantage of some of the new features that are supported by newer versions of SharePoint Framework, another valid reason for upgrading your solutions is if you have a different version of the SharePoint Framework installed in your workstation, or you have to deal with incompatibilities with Node.js that's currently installed in your workstation. Finally, a good reason to upgrade your SPFx solutions is if you'd like to contribute to the community and take an existing sample and upgrade it just so that everyone can benefit from the latest version of SharePoint Framework.
So now let's discuss what our session story is for the day. Perhaps we have found an SPFx web part sample that's been built with an older version of SPFx. We'll use one today that was built on 1.7.0, but my current development environment is using 1.11.0. When we try to build this web part, we'll likely encounter errors. So what options do we have? Well, let's take a look at finding that web part sample first, and then we'll use two features of the Office 365 CLI, the first being SPFx Doctor, to determine what might be the problem with using that older web part in our current development environment. And then we'll use the project upgrade feature to actually perform an upgrade on this web part so it's now compatible with my environment, which is running SPFx 1.11.
You can absolutely use the tools that we'll be showing you today to upgrade your own solutions. But for the purpose of this demo, what we'll do is we'll actually use a sample that's available in the SPFx web part samples. So to find some samples, you just need to go to aka.ms/SPFx-webparts. The SPFx web part sample browser is a great place for you to find samples of web parts that you can use in your own solutions. There's a lot of web parts that are created by members of the community like you and I and David. Some of these web parts are very simple. Some other web parts are actually quite complicated and very exciting when you look at the code. And what it'll do is it'll give you this sample browser that allows you to find things by version of the framework if you want to deal with something like React or handlebars, by the SharePoint Framework version, by the compatibility. So if you're looking for a sample that is specific for SharePoint 2019 versus SharePoint Online or SharePoint 2016, you can do that as well. We also have some other facets that you can search from. For example, you can search by year, so you can look at older samples, or by authors if you have a favorite author. So what I'll do here is I'll search for a sample by my favorite author. And so I'll search for David Warner. And David's created quite a few samples here. And one of the ones that I like is this dynamic bundling and loading. If you haven't used this sample, I strongly recommend you take a look at it. But for the purpose of today, we're actually going to try to upgrade it. So if I click on the sample in the sample browser, it'll take me to the source code associated to this sample. You can actually drill through the source code and take a look at the code. But the other thing you can do is look at the README file. Every sample has an associated README, which tells you what the web part does. It always shows you a preview, and it always shows you the version of SPFx framework that was used, as well as other things like who created the sample, when it was updated, and how to install it. Now, I know this is the sample that I want, so I'll actually go and download it. Now, unfortunately, there's no easy way to download the sample directly from here. You go to the root of the repository, and from there, you can just click on the code button, and you can click on download zip. Now, if you're already familiar with GitHub, you can also open it in GitHub, where you can clone the repository. But we're trying to keep this as simple as possible, so we'll just click on download the zip, and it'll start downloading. Now, this repository is quite large because it contains a lot of samples. And that download will actually be a little big. It'll take a while, but once it's downloaded, we'll actually expand the zip file and we'll find the sample from the folder. All right, so once the zip file has been downloaded, we extract it. That's what I did here. I didn't want you to have to watch me extracting a huge zip file, so I extracted it in advance for you. You can click on it. You can go to the master folder in the sample folder, and then you just need to look for the sample that we used. The sample name was JS.dynamic bundling libraries, so we can actually open that. Okay, so once in the folder, I can just right-click on the folder and say open with code. It'll open it in the Visual Studio Code. You can use your own favorite code editor. I really like Visual Studio Code for doing SPFx development. Now I'll pass it on to David, who's going to show you how to use the Office 365 CLI tools to analyze and upgrade the solution.
Thanks, Hugo. Now that we've decided which web part to use and downloaded it, I've gone ahead and opened it here in Visual Studio Code. So the first thing we'd like to do is install all the npm node modules required to run this solution. We can use the built-in terminal within Visual Studio Code by selecting Control tilde. Now this is the key that's right next to the 1 character on your keyboard. Using the terminal that's been launched, we'll go ahead and perform our npm install. With the npm install having been completed, we'll go ahead and clear the screen and we'll perform a gulp bundle to see if our solution will build. Now immediately we're running into an error. We can see that it's telling us that we're currently using Node 10.22, which is what's required for the newest version of the SharePoint Framework 1.11, but this particular example is looking for something greater than 8.9.4, but less than version 9 of Node. And if we take a peek into the package.json file, we can see the reason is because this particular sample was built using SPFx version 1.7.0, while we have installed 1.11.0. So we're left with a decision to make. Do we downgrade our SharePoint development components installed on our machine to be compatible with this solution? Or do we upgrade this solution to be compatible with our 1.11 components installed? As mentioned earlier, our plan is to use this web part as the basis for a production-worthy solution in our SharePoint environment. We certainly don't want to use older technology, so ideally we'd like to upgrade this to 1.11, but the steps required to do that manually might be quite cumbersome. This is a perfect example of where the Office 365 project upgrade functionality provides an accelerated path to upgrading this particular SharePoint web part. Now, before we go into the demo on how to install the Office 365 CLI, Hugo, could you please cover some of the documentation that talks about the installation procedures?
Absolutely. Thank you, David. So the first thing to do is you go to the pnp.github.io/Office365-CLI, which will take you to the Office 365 CLI documentation. And the installation is actually quite simple. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see that you can use either npm or yarn to install the Office 365 CLI. So you just type npm I for install, -g because you want to install it globally on your workstation, and then you type @pnp/Office365-CLI. It'll install it on your workstation, and then you can get started.
Thanks, Hugo. Back in our web part solution in Visual Studio Code, let's go ahead and perform the needed commands to install the Office 365 CLI as we saw within the documentation. To begin, we'll go ahead and close our package.json and we'll clear the screen on our terminal. And I'll go ahead and paste in the command we saw defined within the documentation for installing the Office 365 CLI. And we'll go ahead and click Enter to install. The CLI looks like it's been installed successfully, but let's go ahead and do an npm list just to confirm. We'll clear our screen and I'll paste in npm list. We're only looking at the top level, so depth equals 0, -g for global, and we'll see the results of what's installed for us at the global level. We can see we've got our SharePoint generator, we've got the Office 365 most recent version, 2.13.0, gulp, npm, and yeoman. Now in this session, we're primarily going to focus on the project upgrade functionality of the Office 365 CLI. But I did want to pause and take a moment to mention another feature that is available within the CLI called SPFx Doctor. SPFx Doctor is a feature of the CLI that allows us to verify our environment configuration, such as our installed components are compatible with our solution components. So wherein originally, when we downloaded and provided the installation of the npm node modules, we had to build to determine there was an error, SPFx Doctor could have let us know before we even tried to build. Let's jump over to the documentation for SPFx Doctor to take a quick look at the functionality that's available to us, and then we'll come back to Visual Studio Code for a quick demo on how we could take advantage of it.
Once Office 365 CLI is installed, we can just go to the commands. All the commands are documented. The one that we want to look at is the SPFx Doctor. And the SPFx Doctor, as you can see, is pretty simple to use. You type SPFx Doctor and the options. For most cases, we don't need to pass any options. We can just type SPFx Doctor. SPFx Doctor will use the context from where you ran the tool. So if you run SPFx Doctor inside of a SharePoint Framework solution, it'll analyze the current solution and analyze your environment. If you run it outside of a SharePoint Framework solution, just in your root folder, for example, it'll look at your entire environment and will make recommendations about your environment. So let's look at some of the samples here. For example, if you wanted to run SPFx Doctor and you wanted to make sure that your environment works with SharePoint Framework for SharePoint 2019, you would just type SPFx Doctor --env for environment and SharePoint 2019. If you don't specify the environment, it'll automatically assume that you're trying to run for SharePoint Online. Now let's go back to David, who will actually demonstrate some of this in action.
Thanks, Dr. Bernier. Now that we've reviewed the documentation, let's go ahead and run SPFx Doctor against our solution to see what the results provide us. To do that, I'll go ahead and paste in the command to execute SPFx Doctor. In this case, O365 SPFx Doctor. And now that SPFx Doctor has completed its analysis, we can see it could have told us from the beginning that we had an incompatible version of Node installed for this particular solution, which is no doubt a handy tool and could have saved us from experiencing the errors we encountered when we originally tried to bundle this solution. So now that we know we need to upgrade this solution to be compatible with the SharePoint Framework 1.11 components installed on our machine, let's begin by reviewing the documentation for the Office 365 CLI Project Upgrade command. And to cover that documentation, I'll turn it back over to my good friend and co-presenter, Hugo.
Thank you. All right, so to run the SPFx project upgrade, the options are very simple. So one of the things that you can do is you can specify which version you want to run the upgrade for. By default, it'll automatically assume that you're trying to run the latest version of the SharePoint framework. You can also specify the type of package manager that you want, as well as the type of shell that you want to use, either Bash, PowerShell, Command. The default is Bash. But probably the most useful options that you'll be using are the output file and the output type. Let's start with the output type. The output type allows you to specify whether you want to have a JSON report, a text report, a markdown report, or a code tour report. All the output types, with the exception of the code tour, will require you to pass an output file. So this is where you specify the file name that you want to generate when you run the upgrade report. There are lots of samples in the documentation that show you how to use this tool, but probably the best way to learn is to watch David do an upgrade. David?
Thanks, Hugo. Let's jump back to the demo. Now that we're back in Visual Studio Code, we're going to demonstrate how to use the project upgrade command using two of the output methods we highlighted in the documentation. The first output method will be to generate the upgrade report in Markdown format. The second method will be using a Visual Studio Code extension named Code Tour, which will walk us through each of the steps required to upgrade one by one. Let's begin with the first method of generating the upgrade report in Markdown format. The project upgrade command is very similar to how we instantiated the SPFx Doctor command. I'm going to go ahead and paste in the command that we'll need to identify not only the format of our report, but also the report name we'd like it to be called. Let's take a quick moment and look at exactly what we're requesting. We instantiate the CLI by saying Office 365, and then we use the project upgrade command by saying SPFx project upgrade. We then provide the parameter arguments we would like to use. In this case, we're saying the output format will be Markdown. Now this could be JSON, text, or tour, and we'd like our file name to be called SPFx upgrade report.md. Now before I hit enter to execute this command, keep an eye over here on the Explorer window. We're going to see that our Markdown file is generated when I select enter. Now we see that immediately our SPFx upgrade report has been generated and available for us to take a look at. Now at this point, it's important to note that the report has not actually made any changes. If we open it, it's simply instructions given to us to perform the upgrades necessary to bring the solution up to version 1.11. It doesn't actually make any changes for us automatically. But what it does provide is all of the steps necessary to upgrade this solution to 1.11. All of the steps we would have had to go back through all of the release notes from 1.7.0 to 1.11 and find out what's changed. So to get a better look at that, we can close our terminal and we can take a look at the preview of our report, which is a cleaner way of reading the report in a more legible manner. Now, what we find in this report is all of the steps necessary for us to ensure that not only our files within the solution have been upgraded, but the NPM packages themselves have been upgraded and installed as well. But it's quite long. It might actually be a little hard to keep track of where we are at in the process of performing these upgrades. Well, that's where our second method of utilizing the project upgrade command comes in, using the code tour extension. To begin the demo of the project upgrade command using the code tour, let's go ahead and start by closing our reports. And click on the extensions button within Visual Studio Code. Now you can see that I already have code tour installed. You may or may not. If you don't, we'll go ahead and want to install it. So you can just do a search on code tour, all one word, and we'll find the code tour extension available right here. As a short summary, the code tour extension provides a guided walkthrough of the upgrade commands that we had already found in our report. As you'll see, it makes it easier to go step by step through each of those commands, ensuring that you don't lose your place. Once you've installed the code tour extension and you go back to your solution, you'll find a section at the bottom of the Explorer called Code Tour. And this allows you to record a walkthrough if you wanted to create one from scratch. But this is the functionality that we'll take advantage of within the CLI using the project upgrade command. To utilize the code tour method of the project upgrade command, it's not much different than how we did when requesting to use the markdown report. To do that, we'll begin by closing the extension description page, and I'll go ahead and leave the code tour section here open on our Explorer, because once we do generate the output files for our code tour using the project upgrade command, we'll see all of those walkthrough steps are automatically added there for us in that section. So let's open the terminal window, and I'll paste in the command to generate the project upgrade report using the code tour extension. As you can see, it's not really any different with the exception of calling out a different output method. Whereas originally we said we wanted it to be a markdown file, we're now saying we want it to be a tour file. Now, just like we did when we output the markdown upgrade report, keep an eye on the Explorer window over here when I select the Enter button. We'll notice that a tours folder has been generated and an upgrade.tour file has been created. And we can also see down in the code tour section of our Explorer window, the project upgrade code tour has been generated, ready for us to start the tour. So now we can go ahead and kick off that tour by selecting that Start Tour button. And we'll see what happens is it takes us to the very first step within our report. We can tell that it gives us step 1 of 28. So what we had found in our original report was 28 steps that need to be accomplished for us to upgrade this solution to SPFx version 1.11. Now, what is also available to us are each of the steps required to be taken down here in the code tour section. We can actually scroll through and see what each step is for us to accomplish. Additionally, what's cool is the code tour extension opens up the file for where it's requesting we make the change in the particular step that we're at. So for step 1, it's telling us that we need to upgrade the SP core library from version 1.7.0 to 1.11.0. Plus, what's even better is the command is clickable. So I can actually click on this command and we'll see that the terminal is executing that command and installing version 1.11 of that SP core library for us. Now that we've completed step 1 of our code tour, it's time to move to the second step. To do that, we simply click on the little arrow button, which represents next, or we could use Control right arrow. When we click on that, it takes us to the next item, for example, SPLow-subset that needs to be upgraded, and again gives us the command that we can click on to accomplish that. Now, this is a super cool and useful feature available to us as part of the code tour experience. It is important to note, though, that not every step will have a clickable execution path for us to make the changes. Some steps may require us to make manual changes to the files. For example, let me go ahead and expand the window here. If we go down to required step number 18, we can see that we need to make a change to our tsconfig.json file extends property by adding this value. This is not something the code tour will do for us by clicking on some string or link. This will actually have to be done for us manually. We'll want to copy this value and paste it into our file. Now we can collapse this code tour flyout at any time by just clicking on the little diamond button right here next to the code tour icon. We can bring it back by clicking on it again. Now, since there are 28 total steps to upgrading this project to version 1.11 of SPFx, we don't want to make you sit and watch us execute every single step. So let's fast forward to the last step. All right, we performed all the steps necessary to upgrade our project to version 1.11 of SPFx, and we're at our final step within the code tour experience. And we can see that the guidance is once you have tested your upgrade is successful, you can delete the tour folder and its contents. So at this point, we need to test our solution and see if it's working. To do that, we'll go ahead and close our upgrade.tour file, and we'll close our code tour section right over here on the left Explorer window, and we'll give ourselves a nice clean terminal window to work within. Now to accomplish that, we'll go ahead and execute the same gulp bundle that we had when we originally downloaded the solution after we installed the NPM modules and tried to bundle it. That's when we received our error. Let's try the exact same thing again and see our experience. And yay, this time we've got success. Plus, we've been able to upgrade our solution to the newest version of the SharePoint Framework, version 1.11. And we are now ready to utilize this web part as a basis for our next level of development.
I knew you could do it. You could do it, David. So David successfully upgraded his solution, but this is what we talked about today. First of all, we talked about when you should upgrade your solutions and why you should upgrade your solutions. Then we showed you how you can find some web part samples that you can use, but of course you can use your own web parts to upgrade as well. We showed you how you can download and use those web part samples. And then we showed you how to use the SPFx doctor to analyze your solution for compatibility in your environment as well. Finally, we showed you how to upgrade your SPFx solutions using the Office 365 CLI SPFx project upgrade command.
And what we've got available for you next is useful links. So we covered a whole host of information, a lot to consume. We hope you enjoyed it, but really it bubbles down to taking advantage of these 3 links. The first is the aka.ms shortcut to finding some web part samples that you may want to learn more about and utilize. All brought to you by PnP, all completely free of charge. In this specific demo, we saw how to utilize the code tour VS Code extension in conjunction with the project upgrade command, which could be available at aka.ms/0365CLI. We hope you enjoyed this session today, and we look forward to getting your feedback. So please use the aka.ms PnPVC feedback short URL, or you could take a picture of the QR code here, but we would love to hear your feedback on what you thought of today's session. And in the end, thank you. We both appreciate your time. Hugo, any amazing words to end it with?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you enjoyed the session, the speaker was Hugo. If you didn't like the session, the speaker was David.
Exactly. Thank you all.